Story. My name is Tegan Aline.
My name is Melanie Nevis.
And we're in a new season, and we decided last season that we were going to talk about saints this season because there's so many, and there's honestly too many good stories. And so that's what we're going to do this season. Welcome to the season of saints. At least the first season of saints. I feel like we can't do all of them. There's no way I'll do all of them in one season, so we'll have to do some more later.
There are a ton of saint stories.
There are a ton, and it's because of that whole Christian movement that kind of like took over the world for centuries.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to look at saints because, in a lot of the stories that we typically look at and we've looked at over the last couple of seasons, it is true that like the majority of the stories that we've been looking at have a tendency to either be written by like members of the church and somewhat maybe monks or things like this, or they're often written by Romans, right? And we see most of our stories, the knowledge is kept through those two lines. But I think saint stories have like an extra layer on top of them. They're like extra Christian, obviously, because they're saints. And it really kind of causes us to have to form some of our own conclusions and make some assumptions for the sake of like how we feel it might have been, just because we know that there's so many missing parts, right? Potentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, not even potentially. There are so many missing parts.
I don't want to assume, but it seems like that seems to be the case. So I wanted to start with this. The saint that I chose today is not the saint that I told you I was going to do, which I am still going to do something on that saint, but later. I decided to start with this saint because I was just looking up, first of all, I was looking up saints in kind of like the areas in and around where I live. So like I live in France, and then like I was also curious about some Spanish saints because I learned about a really cool, interesting saint when I was in Barcelona a few years ago. And, just kind of like some of the famous European saints around. And I was looking kind of mostly between France and Spain. And what I noticed immediately is like France has so many female saints, which I mean, I'm cool with male saints, but obviously I'm more interested in girls, you know what I mean? Even though their stories are like super tragic.
Often, yeah.
But I noticed that like in Spain, the 5 most famous saints are all men, and the majority of like their indoctrinated saints seem to be male. Like there's obviously exceptions to that, but it just seems like France, it's very interesting to me how France holds on to like female history in the terms of Christian legend. Like I find a lot more of it here than I even did growing up in the Catholic Church in Canada. Like we didn't hear about.
That's interesting.
I never really heard much about women other than like Mary, and then maybe the girl who saw Mary in Lourdes, which I would love to do an episode on, but I gotta save it. But other than that, we never really got stories about like the women involved with like Catholicism in the church. So, did you find that? Like, you're Portuguese, you grew up Catholic, yeah?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And like, the what's it called? The 3 saints, the 3 most popular saints in Portugal do tend to be male. However, I also grew up with the stories of Fatima. So there were 3 kids that lived in Portugal, and it was, I think, 1917, where they saw the image of Fatima, of Mary, and appeared to them. And then I think each of them ended up having their own story. One of them became a nun.
As the girls who saw Mary often tended to do, become nuns.
Yeah,
I think the girl Bernadette from Lourdes also did. I think.
Yeah. It was like Francisco and Jacinta, and they saw like the vision of the lady. They were tending sheep with their cousin Lucia. So those are the 3: Lucia, Jacinta, and Francisco. and they were all under the age of 10.
Yeah, they're babies.
And yeah, Mary appeared to them and kind of instructed them to pray for the conversion of sinners. And basically after these visions, they kind of all took on certain I don't want to say like flagellation techniques because it wasn't that, but they started fasting and wearing tight cords around their waists and things like that. And I don't know, one of them ended up joining the
This
nunnery.
just took a
The other
turn. It
one,
sounds extreme.
yeah, the other one, I think, well, they all died really young. Francisco died at the age of 10.
No.
Jacinta kind of devoted the pain. She became really ill. She devoted the pain of her illness to the conversion of sinners and died in like 3 years later in 1920. So both of them are buried in Fatima in Portugal. And then the last one became a nun and like lived until a ripe old age in a nunnery.
I
So
feel like
I grew up with those stories.
yeah,
But
yeah,
like there are still
romantic.
2 females in that story.
Yeah, true.
It's a major
We're gonna
thing
have
in
to do an
Portugal.
entire season just devoted around like Mary. Like I didn't include any of those stories related to Mary or Mary Magdalene
No,
or
neither did I.
anything
No.
anything like that because I feel like that has its own like it's its own season and there's probably like so many things and we should just do an episode one day where we compare like the Lady of Fatima to Our Lady of Lourdes because like
Mm-hmm.
they have similar stories in similar places and
Mm-hmm.
that's actually a common theme amongst many of the places where visions of Mary are seen. But
Yeah.
yes, today I just like even in France, who I am going to talk about this saint later. I'm not talking about her today, but I am going to also talk about Joan of Arc because I feel like she is like
Mm-hmm.
one of the most famous saints in the country. And I think even outside of being a saint, people just know her for her story. And to
Mm-hmm.
be honest with you, just at least in the south of France, I can't really remember when I've been in churches in the north, but there is always a Joan of Arc in the church, no matter where I've been.
Eh,
There's always one. There's always
and
homage
she
to
did a
her.
pretty brave thing, if the story is true.
Her story is freaking fucking wild, I gotta say. So that's gonna be another episode. But today, I want to talk about a saint named Saint Estelle. And the reason why I wanted to talk about her today is because I thought it would be a little bit of an interesting bridge because she was actually Gallo-Roman and her
Mm.
mother is said to be descended from like a high level of Druid family.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
So when I was looking up, when I was like, who am I going to talk about? Who am I going to research? I saw that and I was like, oh, damn, that fits. But I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really know anything about her prior to me doing the research. I wish I could say it's going to lead into something about the Druids. Unfortunately, it's not because
Not really.
obviously we don't know anything about the Druids. But I was hoping for that when I had got started with it. But she is known as one of like the more well-known saints in the country of France. And she was said, Estelle also means the name, it also means star. The translation for
Mm-hmm.
Estelle is star. And she was said, she is kind of like an alleged, I noticed the word alleged saint from this time.
Okay.
But
Okay.
she's from the 3rd century, which would
Mm-hmm.
set her dead in the Gaulish France. So I think it's important and kind of why I like circling it all back around is because it's like a grander body of research and interest of mine. But what Gaul was and where it was. I often say in the podcast that Gaul was France, but it was should probably clarify that it was like a lot bigger than just France. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're talking, 1st to 5th century, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about the whole area of France, the whole area of Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Germany, parts of Switzerland, and parts of northern Italy were all considered Gaulish, a Gaul area
Mm-hmm.
at a certain time. And it's really doubly interesting to be aware of the fact that it was broken up into many, many communities and many, many tribes. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of different groups of people vying for a lot of different land, vying for, it was pretty much like there was a whole bunch of people, not nobles, but like high level tribes people that were sometimes going into other territories. Everybody was trying to expand, basically, is kind of
Yeah.
the name of the game. And then when we
Mm-hmm.
get into this like Roman Gallo situation, it's because the Romans were also on an expansion conquest. And before Roman Gallo culture exists, we actually see like a huge period where there are tons of battles between the Romans and the Gauls. The Gauls like almost beat the Romans in Rome at one point.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
beat them in one war. They didn't like take the city, I don't think, but they were a lot of these different groups were formidable foes to the Romans. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this was
Yeah.
kind of like a territory branch out all through these different parts of Europe. There was land grabs trying to happen everywhere. And I still don't have the full history on. I've always wondered why the Gauls just like they never say that the Romans like seized or took over Gaul. Like in this particular area, it
Mm-hmm.
was like they just adopted a bunch of the cultures, and I've always wanted to know a little bit more about that. Like
I think that's
why?
sometimes the best way to take over. You
Yeah,
slowly infiltrate.
and I think also stability might have been like a huge element. Trading.
For sure.
Trading is
Yeah.
always I don't think we give like trading its props, because trading always seems to be the gateway. Like
Mm-hmm.
it across the world. It starts with like I'm gonna give you this, I'm gonna get that, but then like things kind of progress over
Yeah.
a certain amount of time. So
Because in order
as
to trade properly, you have to share certain customs and understand the other person's customs in order to actually,
or at least just
make
get
the
a
trade.
sense of them. Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So I think it's also interesting. So in the case of Saint Estelle, she is from this area of France that is like, if everybody wants to take a moment to go to a map and look at the map of France, but on the west, there's the west coast. And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, if you think about, if anybody here actually knows where I live in the Pyrenees border, right? So, like, the Midi Pyrenees, which is the border from France to Spain. It's pretty much as south of France as you can get, because the other side of the mountains is Spain. So, if you go to the west of there, you'll find yourself on the west coast, the Atlantic coast. And there you'll find yourself in the Basque region. You keep going up, up, and up the coast, you'll and then inward a little bit, you'll get into the area of Bordeaux. And then if you keep going up, there's an area called La Rochelle, which is a very beautiful area as well. So Estelle came from this town called Saint, spelled
Of course.
Saintes, like, and it's kind of like in between, like it's actually closer to La Rochelle than it is Bordeaux. But if you were going in through the countryside, going from Bordeaux up into La Rochelle, it's like in this particular area here. So it's definitely farther
Mm-hmm.
north than where we are, but it's not all the way
That's
north.
still just a
Not
couple
like
of hours from you. Like Bordeaux's not that far from you.
Bordeaux is like 4 hours
It's what,
from
3?
Toulouse.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have to go
Yeah.
to Toulouse to get to Bordeaux.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then it's like also like La Rochelle is like, I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, the point being is that it's not all the way north in the French coastline. The whole coastline
Yeah.
in France is very interesting in itself, but it's kind of like midway, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting about her is that, like, or her lineage is that her father was Roman, and her mother is said to have come from like a high level family of Druids. But that's all that is said. And then there's no more information given about her mother or about their connection to Druidry or anything like that, which I
Mm-hmm.
felt was kind of a bummer. I wish there was more information about that.
I mean, you're looking at what you said, the year 300-ish?
The third century. Yeah, no, so it'd be
Oh,
like
third century.
400,
Okay.
400, right? Or something like that. Wait,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's a long time ago.
But I found it interesting because I was like, I have always held this question of, did Druids exist in Gaul? Because Gaul is technically like they're a Celtic culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we often think of the Celtic cultures of just being in the British Isles, but you know, like we've talked about that during our Celtic season. It was
Yeah.
widespread as far as
Yeah.
Switzerland. You know what I mean? So, and
Mm-hmm.
that all, and the Gaul culture usually connected to what they call the Latene culture, which is a really beautiful um set of artistry and like just different type of cultural practices in and of itself. But I've always wondered, were there Druids in Gaul, and specifically were there Druids in French Gaul? Because it's just like you don't
Mm-hmm.
hear much about it. You would assume because they were like Celtic priests or priestesses or whatever
Right.
that they would exist, but you just don't hear
Mm-hmm.
much about. I haven't come across much information about it. If anybody's got more information about there, I don't care if it's in French. I'll use the translating app, but send it my way because I've always wanted to know. But I thought it was interesting because this kind of assumes then that there was, because
Mm-hmm.
her mother came from that lineage, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's very interesting because that also means that like she is really, see, Estelle is really a product of like the Gallo-Roman era. Like she's really living in that time. She's living in the time where those like those translation, or like those, that translation of culture has kind of crossed over, and they are kind of living more in this style. It's just interesting to see how it gets defined. And to clarify, just for listeners, like Roman, to say Roman Gallo, it's kind of like an era within the territory of Gaul, which was all those countries I listed before, where
Mm-hmm.
it was Romanized, essentially, where
Yeah.
they started to adapt Roman culture. Like, you know, they would give Roman names to Gaulish deities. Some of the Gaulish deities, like the deity of Epona, actually translate over into Rome, but not many. A couple, but not many.
Right.
But in general, it's like, you know, it's this assimilation.
It's a period of, yeah,
We call
it's
it
a
an
period of
assimilation.
transition and melding of things. So it's hard to kind of tell what's what.
Yeah, and it's going on for a long time, and it's interesting to me just because it's, from everything that I've seen so far, it seems like it was a relatively like calm crossover. It wasn't like a violent, hostile takeover. You must enforce
Yeah.
this, and this. So I find those interesting, but also confusing because you're just like, wait, when did this happen? How did it just happen so naturally? You know what I mean? And then I think of like the Americanization of Canada, and I'm like, okay, it must have been like that. You know what I mean?
Right? Yeah.
Because some,
It's a
especially
really
like
gradual
places,
shift.
places closer to the American border. Like now living here, I really didn't see it when I lived in Toronto and like Canada, but now that I live here, I'm like, oh yeah, we are way so like in the southern Ontario, like we're so
Yeah.
Americanized compared to like the rest of Canada, or compared to like other like places like deeper into Canada. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sure are.
Yeah.
It's
No,
still really different though. Like it is, there's still a distinct difference, but yeah, it's heavily influenced.
like there is absolutely a difference, and I believe that too. And I think like this is why I use it as a comparative, because of course
Yeah.
there is a difference, but honestly there are so many
It's
things that
very
we
heavily
do,
influenced.
that
Yeah.
we say, like there's so many things that are just kind of like, oh, it's actually just in the way that we live our lives. You know what
It
I
is.
mean? That's
But we still say toque instead of beanie, so there you go. It's one thing that
what's
I don't
a
think is gonna
beanie?
change.
Yeah, it'll always be,
Basically a toque.
and that word sounds French, so
Yeah.
oh boy. Okay, so let's get into the actual story of Saint Estelle. So Saint Estelle, like I said, is the daughter of a high level Roman man in this area, and a Gaul Druid mother. And at some point in her life, she comes across a man who we now know today as Saint Eutropius of Sens.
Oh, wow.
Saint Eutropius
That's
of Sens.
a hell of a
He,
name.
well, yeah, it really is. He was actually a hermit living in Sens, and he becomes the first bishop of Sens. So, I mean, when we think of bishops, we kind of think of like the bishops of the churches that we have now, but I think a lot of the time when we hear about the first, hi, Kitty. It's officially summer where we live, so I'm not going to see my cat for like the next 6 months.
Yeah.
She's been home like one day in the last, like 1 hour in the last 3 days. And then she's like, I'm going to go live outside.
She's like, yeah, thank you for my snacks. Bye.
Yeah, I just need food and water and I'm out. I'm like, okay, you do you. Have fun. Don't kill any owls.
An owl would fuck her up. No offense.
No, honestly, I thought I told this story on one of the other podcast episodes where she was trying to attack owl babies.
Owl babies are a different story.
Yeah, and Michael and I were like, dude, you're gonna get fucked up by that owl. Like the mom's gonna kill you. Like back when you
Absolutely.
What are you doing?
Absolutely.
She's wild. It's funny. So anyways, I digress, sorry. But yeah. So Saint Eutropius of Sens was a hermit who was actually sent okay, so the dates are all a little bit hazy. We're not sure who sent him. It was either Pope Clement the First or Pope Fabian, but one of those two popes decided to send this guy to Sens to evangelize Sens. So we have to think about this is the Roman Gallo era. So the Roman Gallo era predates the Roman Catholic era. And that's an important distinction to make. So these people in Rome are sending this guy to a random part of France to evangelize France. They're slowly trying to turn them Catholic. It's not even France, right? Like at this point, it's not. It's Gaul. But they send them here
that area
to evangelize. And, you know, that is met with resistance because they have a polytheistic religion basically already.
Yeah.
But he is, from what I understand, he's living there quite modestly, quite quietly as a hermit. And somehow he meets Estelle. And so the interesting thing about Estelle is that like I said, her father is Roman, but I didn't totally want to give away the fact of like how powerful he was in the region. He's like basically considered a governor of this area.
Okay.
And
very powerful.
Yeah, and this man, Saint Eutropius, he converts Estelle to Catholicism. And she becomes very devout, and she makes a vow of celibacy to the church. And her dad is, you know, he is very pissed off about it. He's not having it. He doesn't like it. He's mad. Her job at this time, from what I'm understanding, from what I'm reading, is to marry and, like, you know, build up their family. Like her mom comes from an esteemed background. She now comes from an esteemed background. She's supposed to marry somebody else that's going to make the Roman Empire or the Roman influence stronger. And she goes the totally opposite direction. And she ties herself to the Catholic Church and to the word of Jesus and God or like whatever. And, you know, takes a vow of celibacy. So that's really important to understand. And so when he's upset and he finds out about this, he decides that he is going to put Saint Eutropius to death, basically.
Okay.
And so he cuts off his head with an axe.
I mean, if it's a sharp axe, that's a pretty clean blow.
I read two things. I read one where he split his head down the center with an axe, and then one where he chopped it off with an axe. I mean, personally, I feel like the more Gaulish method would be to like split the head down the center with an axe. I'm not sure.
Lovely.
And it's funny to read these stories because, you know, me, I'm like totally pro-pagan everything, but I also couldn't help but feel bad for this guy. He seemed like he thought he was doing the right thing. You know what I mean? And so he kills the later becomes the first bishop of Sens, and then also he kills his daughter as well because she refuses to reject her faith. She refuses to go back to her family's beliefs, and so he has to make a statement of this, and so he kills her as well. The
I just
interesting
okay. Anytime religion becomes involved, I'm like, can't we all just accept that everyone does different things without trying to force it down anyone else's throat, and it would have avoided a lot of this?
Though I, in theory, completely agree with you, I mean, you have to look at who her father was. Like, he probably couldn't just let her do it, right? Like, he was a governor
No,
of
I'm
an
talking about the
area.
hermit. I'm not talking about even the hermit to go and like his job
Mm.
was to try and get people to convert. Can we just not?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I suppose we could, but
can,
like we said
can
in the
we just
beginning,
not?
I don't think so because it like
Not to victim blame, not to victim blame, but like
well,
Catholicism is notorious for sending missionaries and like doing a whole, but I'm like, do you have to send, like, does your tradition have to be shoved down anyone else's throat? Really? Really? Is it so essential?
well, I think it's important to kind of clarify like what evangelicizing was at that period of time because it's not like it wasn't like the missionaries
No,
system
it's
that
not like
we know,
missionaries.
but
It's not.
it's more like they were like sent to go out and like speak. They were just like speaking to the public, and whoever they were like fishing, and like whoever they reeled in, they reeled in. Like
I know, but that is still a type of like go around and spread the word
yeah,
and like trying it, like it is still a type. It's not as organized and structured of a type that
but I
we're
also
used
don't
to.
think that they necessarily like playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here, but I don't think that
Yeah.
it was meant like I don't think they invented the wheel on that. You know what I
No,
mean?
absolutely
Like
not. I'm not talking about just them. I'm just like in general, can we just not?
I think the answer is no.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Fair
just
enough.
because just because
Because humans are humans.
it just seems to be the way that and I don't agree with it. You know what I mean? I'm just looking at like this is what happened, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
totally.
the reality is like we said at the beginning of the podcast, it's like there was all of these different tribes of people breaking off, spreading around, trying to take over this area, trying to take over that area.
I know. I
Everybody
know.
was trying to take everybody over at a certain point in time at some point, and somebody was like, let's use religion as a tool. You know what I'm not saying it's right. I don't agree with it actually personally. And
Dangerous tool.
I actually agree with what you're saying 100%. Like like just so over being a human sometimes. Like could we just not?
Could we just not?
Yeah, could we relax? But and I'm sure and I think my personal belief is that for what you and I are saying, there are so many billions of people throughout the world, throughout time, that felt the same way.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and it really didn't matter like what you did or what you didn't do. Like the Cathars are like a huge example of that. The
Mm-hmm.
Cathars didn't evangelize; they just started to work. They spoke, but they didn't preach. They were in their communities. They just, they were kind of humble. They kind of kept to themselves. They kept their heads low. They just tried to be good. They always worked. They always were just modest and pious. But that example grew their
Mm-hmm.
faith in and of
Mm-hmm.
itself. And that was enough for the Catholic Church to completely massacre them.
Yep.
So the answer is I no. Like
Catholicism for the win.
ugh. Yeah,
Continue.
I hate
So
that their
he
strategy was so effective too. Don't
I
worry.
know. I know. Okay, so he kills the hermit and kills his daughter.
Yeah, so they say that he killed his daughter by bringing her to the amphitheater, like to the sorry, not to the amphitheater, to the Colosseum.
Mm.
So that's how he sentenced her to death. So
Wow.
I was trying, yeah. So that's kind of all that was said about her. And I was like, okay, so wait, where and how did she die? You know what I mean? So I was trying to find
Mm-hmm.
other information. So I looked up the town Saintes in France, and it seems like they didn't have a coliseum, but they did have an amphitheater, a Roman amphitheater, which would have been like a, kind of like a stage type of
Yeah.
setup. But I don't know if they did stuff like executions like that there. So I'm not sure if she died there or if he sent
Huh.
her, if he, because the center of Gaul, of Roman Gaul at that time was really in the south. You know what I mean? And so I know for sure we have two Roman Colosseums here. We have one in Nîmes and one in Arles. And they're
Mm-hmm.
smaller versions than the Colosseum that you see in Rome, but they are
Yeah.
set up the same and they were for the same
Mm-hmm.
use. And I couldn't find, it's so funny. There's not a lot actually written about her in the end. I couldn't find out exactly how she died. But for context, in case people are unfamiliar with the Roman Colosseum and how people could die, here's a list of the ways you potentially die in a Roman Colosseum. And originally, when those Colosseums were designed, they're designed to honestly entertain the public
Yeah.
by watching gruesome acts. It's like, if all those violent movies we watched were real. that's what that's what the Colosseum was, and they would
Yeah.
usually put criminals in there, and usually they were trying to avoid actually executing other Romans. But if you're in a traitor situation like this, then you
Mm-hmm.
might be cast into the Colosseum. So, ways you could die is you could be burned alive. So they used it for burning at the stake. You could be killed with
Mm.
a sword, like by a
Mm.
gladiator. You could be crucified, like Jesus was. You could be thrown to wild animals. And we've
Mm.
talked about it in other episodes, but some of the Colosseums have been known to be flooded with water and used for like
Yeah.
ship battles, and they would fill them with like crocodiles and stuff. So they could be thrown to lions, they could be thrown to tigers, bears,
I mean,
crocodiles.
like,
They were very inventive.
yeah.
They would be sometimes they would be obliged to impersonate a character from a myth and
Mm-hmm.
doomed to die. And I think that one's
Mm-hmm.
probably not what happened to her, but interesting to mention, because here in the south where we are, the famous story from where we are is that story of the Minotaur.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, that's like super famous. That's why the Hall de la Machine that makes all those crazy monsters.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
why they built
They
the
did the
Minotaur
Minotaur.
for Toulouse, because it's considered a labyrinth city. And the story of that
Oh.
myth, it's a Greek myth, I think, is
It
that
100% is a Greek myth. That's why I'm surprised. I'm like, wait, what?
Greek crosses over into Roman
Yeah,
into
yeah, yeah.
France, like, ugh. And
Yeah, everyone borrows.
but I have seen examples of that in like movies and stories where they will put like a bull's head on top of a human person, and then a human person will have to like run through a labyrinth, or be chased by a person with a bull's head on. So they
Oh,
were
people
like,
are so weird.
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Mel Mel's theme today is like, I'm over humankind. Like, who are, like, what the
Yeah.
fuck?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I feel you, girl. I feel you. I definitely have days where I feel like that too. Very often, actually. So those are many ways she could have died. I'm going to assume that maybe she was like burned or something like that, or maybe crucified or something like that, or stoned. They didn't mention stoning here, but I imagine
Mm,
that could have also been a thing. Just something to
probably.
mark her as a person who's turned their back. And I think it's crazy that he would let his daughter go through this, but I also think
He had to set
maybe
an example.
he had to accept an example, and I don't know where women sat in the hierarchy at this period of time too. So maybe he was just like, he didn't really care that much about, like, he cared enough about her that she needed to do her duty, but not so much about her that like he was worried about the way that she died. Oddly
I
enough,
do
though,
wonder what the mom felt about all of
it's
this,
funny
but
because it's silent. There's nothing about her. There's nothing about the Druid history, which is what brought me here in the first place. So I was a little bit pissed about that. But I mean, considering this is now a Catholic story, first of all, we have to be real with the fact that it's ultimately a Catholic story. And of course, they're very much demonizing the Romans in this story, right? Like you hear it and you're like, these people, you know, they murdered them like savages, you know what I mean? And whatever.
It wouldn't be the first time. I think even in the story of Odysseus, isn't it Agamemnon who learns he has to sacrifice his daughter to appease the goddess, and he dupes his wife into telling her that she's going to marry Achilles and basically sacrifices his daughter.
Oh yeah. Instead. I mean, I don't know that story off the top of my head, but there's like 1,000 instances of it.
There's so many. That's just the first one that popped into my head, but there's so many stories of
these stories might be old, but misogyny is older. The patriarchy is older than all of these stories. So yeah, I can see it. But oddly enough, and I thought this was and this is like the one indication I have. There's two indications I have that we obviously don't have the full extension of the story. The fact that her mother was a Druid, but also, you know, like the Romans fucking fucked with the Druids. So that's a weird relationship right there. Okay. But also the interesting thing is that her father decides to bury her in the same tomb as Saint Eutropius. So the man that converted her, he ends up burying them together. And this is important because you can go there and their tomb is still there where both of them are from to this day.
Has it been exhumed?
So here's
Has it ever been exhumed?
Interesting thing is that there's a little bit more. Apparently, nobody really knew the story, not so much about her, but the Saint Eutropius. Until the 6th century, the new pope in the 6th century in Saint actually deeply went through all of his relics. So the relics of Saint Eutropius, and you know, researched them, and it seems as though he filled out some of the blanks of this story.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's not like it's a tomb, but yeah, it's been exhumed like that for thousands and thousands of years. You could go to the church.
So we can trust it. We can trust the church.
100%. 100%. We can say without a doubt there was no elaborations made in this story at all.
Great.
And there was and there was certainly no information left out.
Okay.
But I think it's interesting just because I'm not exactly sure when this season will be going out, but if it does go out in May, will it go out in May?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So Saint Estelle's Saint Day. And it's important to know that in France, every saint from France has a saint day. And if you have the name of that saint, like many people here are named after a saint, if you have a name after a saint, you are celebrated on the same day as the saint.
Yeah.
So Saint Estelle's Saint Day is May 11th. So it's coming up.
Ah. Yeah, I think, so is that like your name day basically? Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what's celebrated more than your birthday sometimes. At least in Greece. I know it's celebrated like more than birthdays is like your name day.
I think it's mostly, a lot of times. I think here it's mostly amongst a bit of the older generations. But yeah, they want you to take it almost as seriously as a birthday.
Yeah.
Like I know that like some of my husband's family members, they want to get calls and cards and flowers or something, you know? Yeah. And her Saint's Day is going to come up. It's May 11th. And she is considered, so Saint Estelle is considered the patron saint of young Christian girls because she was really young when all of this happened. And she is classified as a virgin martyr, which is such a bummer. And also her patron saint was the Virgin Mary of the Sea. So.
Oh, sure.
So interesting. I thought that part was just cool because it just tied back to like all the stuff related to Mary and, you know, they're not so far
okay. There's like the part of me that I'm like, how young is young? Because, you know, this is how cults form.
So much to unpack in that statement there. How young is young? I don't know. People died young back then. She was
I know.
probably pretty young. She was probably 11.
Yeah.
Second of all, the church is 1,000% a cult. It's one of the most well
Woohoo.
done. Like it's good OP a cult. Like I actually, it's funny to me how we use the word cult, because in French, actually, when they talk about like a cult, the church would be considered a cult. Islam would be considered a cult. Like that's what they are.
Yeah.
That's just what they are. You know what I mean?
That's another season that we should do, is like on some cults. There's so much stuff on Netflix
Like
that's come out in recent
freaky.
years about different
Yeah,
cults.
I think when North Americans say cult, they are talking about a freaky American cult where somebody drank a bunch of passed out Kool-Aid, and everybody like tried to die to go into the mothership or something.
Yeah.
But ultimately, all religion is occult. Like all religion is a cult.
Yeah.
Because the definition of a cult is like a group of people that like form together and have strict beliefs, and like so like one of the best cults in America? What is that freaking, the one where all the people are from Utah? Mormons? Do you know how many Mormon TikTokers and YouTubers there are out there? When I showed my husband, like, because he's French, his concept of Mormons is like really old school. When I showed him what a modern Mormon woman looks like, he was like, "That's a Mormon person?" And I was like,
well,
"Yeah,
there's
bro."
Mormons, and then there's Amish, right? And Mormons have a bit more liberty than the Amish.
Oh yeah, but I know that, but there's also the Church of the Latter-day Saint, also
Yeah.
super cultish.
There's tons.
There's so
There's tons.
so many, but you know, like technically they're all cults, including Catholicism. So nobody's exempt from the cults.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nobody's exempt from if you're religious, you're probably in a cult. I'm sorry. Just don't take it so hard. Not every cult is trying. The message is maybe not every cult is trying to kill you, but probably in the United States you should be careful. Maybe in Canada too. I don't know.
I think everywhere. Take it with a grain of salt. Like, don't be so indoctrinated.
But I
to believe in something you can't see without like really
I think of Estelle, and I
about it.
wonder, she's the patron saint of young girls, and she was
Mm-hmm.
killed. She was martyred as a virgin, and because she didn't want to renounce her faith. And I think of a girl who maybe was growing up in a society where she was told to do a job, and that's not what she wanted to do. She was more interested, and she met this man who said, "You don't have to do those things. You can devote your life to God." And maybe that was more interesting to her. Like I've been interested in the occult since I was a child. I think I would have back then, I probably might have become a nun, or I might have become something like that. You know what I mean? Because I didn't want to be like wed and bred. You know what I mean? Like that wasn't like where I wanted to go early in my life. And that's what they were making women do for centuries. So maybe this was like her way of standing up for what she wanted. I feel like, well, again, that is me drawing my own conclusions, but like I wonder, right?
You never know.
But it seems like
that's like a very idealistic perspective to have, and I think that we should it's a nicer thought to think that she was actually just standing up for herself rather than she was indoctrinated into believing something else.
Oh, I think everybody who gets involved in religion and spirituality, and I'm speaking for experience, it always starts as them wanting to understand themselves differently, wanting to understand the world differently. There's always a level of interest of like wanting to make sense of something bigger. And I've seen that across the board with, you know, like pagans to Mormons. You know what I mean? There's always a reason. And so
there is.
So I think that there was probably something to it there. Because obviously if you grew up happy, like if you were happy in your condition, what would make you question it? You know what I mean? I guess is my thought. And they were in a shifting place and time in society.
They were,
right?
yeah.
So,
yeah, that's true too.
This is the story of Saint Estelle.
Cool. I hadn't heard about Saint Estelle, so Yeah.
I was really, like I said, first of all, I love the name Estelle, but also I was just drawn to her based on the family background. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And
Yeah.
no shade. Like, I honestly came into it thinking like, wait a minute, why? My brain from being from our time was like, wait a minute, why would she denounce her like Roman father and Druid mother? Like, that's so cool. Like, what? Like, when I realized her dad killed her because she wanted to stay Catholic, I was like baffled. I was confused, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then I had to remember, like, okay, wait, this was like a different period, and the Romans weren't cool with the Christians yet.
Not yet.
It's a bit more time before that happened.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
no
for
problem.
teaching me about that one. Yeah.
That was good. And then, so we are going to, we're going to do this whole season on saints. They're going to be interesting, I think. I'm going to cover
I think
Joan of
so.
Arc for sure at one point. And then also, I still haven't talked about the one I originally was going to do, which I'm still going to do, but I'm going to save it for later.
Okay, so those are your two.
Yeah.
I'm still choosing my other two, but I do have the next episode ready to go. So,
okay, let's do it.
Let's do it. Thank you so much for listening. Remember you can always find us on Instagram, Allegory Straight Podcast, or send us an email, allegoryststraightpodcast@gmail.com.